that the brain is constantly rewiring itself. And for example, after you have an accident and you lose, for example, one part of the brain's hemisphere, then the other hemisphere will often rewire some of the functions of the lost part of the lost hemisphere. That's true not only of the brain, but it's true of the entire body, right? The body is plastic, right? The systems of the body, including the brain, are plastic, and they have the ability at certain moments of crisis, right, to actually rewire themselves until they again get appropriately set in the mold or the pattern that they'll be in. Does everyone get that idea? That's called plasticity. Let me just share for a moment, and set intention, right, on where we are, okay? And we're excited. We're excited. Where are we? Who are we? What are we doing here, okay? So this is not a place, right, for casual therapies. It's not a feel-good place. It's not a doomer place. Oh my God, the world's about to explode, right? Although there's reasons to feel good and there's reasons for therapy, and the world is about to explode. We're doing something very specific though. We got a very specific intention. And I want to set that intention really, really clearly because it's easy to lose. I'm going to try and set it in a new way with your permission, okay? Okay, we in? Are we ready to go? We're ready. Here we go. So we live in this time between worlds. We live in this time between stories. That's a sentence that if you've been here before, you know, because we say some version of it every week. And we always point to the Renaissance, which was also in its own way a time between worlds and a time between stories, when the pre-modern story was breaking down, when pandemics were sweeping Europe and Asia and people were dying on the street. Almost half of Europe actually died. And which we understood then that we couldn't use the old tools of pre-modernity of the traditional world to heal the fracture, to heal the break, to heal the destruction, to heal the breakdown. That in order to move from breakdown to breakthrough, we needed to articulate a new vision, to tell a new story. Because it's only a new story, and a new story of value, that changes the trajectory of history. And so Da Vinci and Facinio, who I mention all the time, and about 1,000 other people gathered in Florence under the patronage of the Medicis, opposed by almost all the other families, right, in Florence, and they began to think and to feel, and they felt in art, and they felt in science, and they felt what is the feminine, and what is Eros, and what's sexuality, and what's relationship, and how do we gather information, and what's the nature of who the human being is? What are the answers to the questions of who are you, and who are we, and where are we, and what's there to do, or where are we going, and what do we really want? And that new story of value, as we've shared many times together, was the story of modernity. And to the precise extent that the plot lines were accurate, modernity birthed what Habermas called, the philosopher Habermas, who's still alive and philosophizing today, probably the greatest critical philosopher of the 20th century. And it birthed, as Habermas called it, the dignities of modernity. But to the precise extent that they got the storyline wrong, which they did, in the Renaissance in major ways, it birthed the disasters of modernity. And those disasters have brought us to this moment in which we're quite literally not just poised before dystopia, we're poised before a potential extinction, the death of humanity, or a dystopian unfolding of humanity, the death of our humanity. But we're also poised before utopia. We also have the potential, right, to unfold a world of unimaginable beauty, of unimaginable depth, of unimaginable goodness, of ever deeper and wider truths, in which no one's left out of the circle, in which everyone can actually respond powerfully and accurately to who am I, and who are we in, and where are we, and where are we going. And not in a way that occludes the uncertainty, not in a way which dissipates the great mystery. The great mystery is there, and we always live at the edge of mystery, reaching right deeper and deeper into the mystery and unfolding it into the light, even as we reach deeper in the same moment, and the mystery itself deepens. We always hold uncertainty, and we always stand before the mystery. And yet, we have the capacity to integrate, to weave together the validated insights from all the great stories of value into a new source code tapestry, into a new source code tapestry, into a new story of value, rooted in what postmodernity denied, rooted in first principles and first values, right? Embedded again in a story of value. And we've come to the conclusion after decades, right, of study, practice, and research, right, that actually at this moment of metacrisis, when everything is at stake, the only response that will actually change the vector of history is not an infrastructure response. Infrastructure would mean let's create new sources of energy. That's critically important. Right? Renewable energy is critically important, but insufficient. Right? Let's find ways to check for waste in water to prevent a bioweapons attack. Critically important, but insufficient. And a social structure change won't do it. Social structure means, let's revision maybe how democracy works. Let's revision laws, right, that demand that X amount of data scientists don't work for the big tech world, but actually work for the government in order to be able to appropriately bind or monitor what big tech is doing. That would be a social structure. It'd be a change in law, right? Those are important changes in law, but actually it's a superstructure change. Right? There's infrastructure, social structure, and superstructure, Marvin Harris's terms, sociologist. Only a superstructure change, and we're just borrowing his terms. But the insight is only a superstructure change, meaning only a change in the answers to the three great questions. Who are you? Right? Who am I? Right? Who are we? That's one question. Right? Where are we? Where am I? Where are we? Right? And then three, what's there to do, or where are we going? Which is really deeply related to what do I really want to do? What's my deepest desire? So those essential questions, who, where, what, right? Those are the questions. That's the new story. And we've got to answer those questions based on first principles and first values that are real. We have to move beyond the postmodern deconstruction of value. We have to realize that value allures, that we're guided by value, and that value evolves, right? Modernity and late modernity, post-modernity were wrong when they said value is not real. And pre-modernity was wrong when it said value doesn't evolve. Value is both real and value evolves. And that's the postmodern understanding. That's the new story of value. Value is real. And so we're working together to articulate 15 basic core first values and first principles, and to articulate the plot line of the story. And the story is a love story. Now, I want to try and say in a new way today why this insanely matters, but I want to try and articulate in a new way today why this matters. So imagine for a second, just imagine this for a second. Imagine that there are 100 billion people who have lived, which is about accurate. There's been about 100 billion living people in the world since the beginning of time. Since 300,000, 400,000 years ago, Homo erectus, as it were, stands on the savanna of Africa and becomes some version of Homo sapiens. Now, from that moment till today, about 100 billion humans. Now imagine that in some sense, you are every one of those people. Remember the chant which we started with? All hearts are beating as one. And in some sense, you are every one of those people. We all share the same essential quality of consciousness. We're all indivisibly part of each other in some fundamental way. But for now, let go of the ontology of it. Let go of the reality of it. Just hold it as a thought experiment. So let's say you live every single one of those lives consecutively, one life after the other. And in some sense, you are all of those people. And Andy Weir, in a little short story called The Egg, actually articulated some version of this thought experiment. So imagine 100 billion people, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And you're all of those people. So how long would it take for those people to go through their lives? And so that means that you're an early hunter-gatherer, and you're at the beginning of agriculture, and you're a man, and you're a woman, and you're a slave, and you're a boy, right? And you're a victim, and you're an apex predator, and you're a murderer, and you're the one who's murdered, right? You get that? You're everyone. You're the rapist, and you're the one who's raped. You're the one who's filled with joy and goodness, right? And right, you're the one who's filled with black melancholy, who can barely move. Right? Imagine that you're everyone. You're literally all of those people, and all of those people live in you. So that's going to take about 4 trillion years. About 4 trillion years. Now, imagine for a second the future. So if the average mammalian species lives about 1 million years, so that means that at this point, 4 trillion years in, means that at this point, 4 trillion years in, you still have 99.5% of your life left to live. Meaning if you unfold all of the future, you only hit 0.5% of humanity. It means you have an enormous amount of life left to live. Wow. Now imagine, friends, imagine that human beings actually learn how to take care of themselves to at least survive in a way that mammals are unable to do, earlier mammals. And imagine we live more than 1 million years. We live 2 million or 3 million or 4 million, or we even actually live the fullness of the possibility, right, of this earth and this star, right, until they burn themselves out and we transmute it into, right, the next possibility. So imagine you live all of that. So then, within the framework of that thought experiment, which is real and valid, we would be literally at the first breath out of the womb. We'd have taken 20 breaths, 50 breaths, right? We're in the first seconds out of the womb right now. And this is just to get a sense, my friends, the future is vast and large. The potential future is vast and large. Trillions and trillions of people, trillions of boys and trillions of girls and trillions of babies and trillions of loves and trillions, right, of peals of laughter and trillions of holy tears and trillions of transformation, trillions of creativity and trillions of Godding, trillions of unique expressions of reality, each one more dazzlingly beautiful with infinite value, right? So there are trillions of new emergence of self-evidently precious value that matters immensely and enormously yet to come. There are trillions of irreducibly unique expressions of infinite value left to come, of infinite divinity left to come. There's more God to come. There's more value to come, but infinitely more value to come. And infinitely more God to come, and not literally infinitely, but virtually infinitely. Wow. Now, go to the next level with me. You ready? Okay, friends? Go to the next level of the thought experiment. And now you realize that your actions taken now will affect all of your future lives. Did you get that? It's what you do now will affect all of your future lives. It'll affect them in one or two ways. One possibility is it'll affect whether you have a future life. In other words, you may behave in a foolhardy way now, which will ensure that you have no future life at all. Now, that's kind of a shocking notion. Meaning, imagine, you're a teenager, and there's lots of things you do as a teenager, right? You wanna experiment, and you wanna go deep inside, and you wanna experience the pain and beauty of the world, and you wanna get new fields of knowledge. Those are all teenage things to do. But you also have to be careful not to do as a teenager. And it's the job of society and parents and your own internal learned, trained discipline not to do is you don't want to take risks as a teenager that will prevent you from growing up, right? So you don't want to take a risk where by that foolhardy act, you actually die. You actually never grow up. You actually never grow into the fullness of who you are, right? Wow. And sometimes we don't even realize we're taking those risks. I remember in Columbus, Ohio, Bexley, Ohio, where I grew up, we used to go jumping building from building, right? And it was intensely dangerous, and didn't even occur to me it was dangerous. I was never hurt. But kind of looking back on it, it's like, wow, what was I thinking, right? We could have fallen, right? And so sometimes you do it unconsciously. And sometimes we're actually aware that there's this immense risk in what we're doing, but we split off the risk. Okay, that's foolhardy. That's foolhardy. Now, we're in the we're not even close to the adolescence of our humanity. And at this moment, what we do in the next 20, 10, 40, 50, 100 years, 200 years from now, in this immediate period of time, will directly affect, according to hard crunched numbers, right, articulated carefully in an entire set of writings on existential risk with people like Nick Bostrom, the student of Derek Parfit at Oxford, who's at the center, who coined the term existential risk, right? But along with, quite a few other serious, hardcore investigators, some of Parfit's other students, Toby Ord or Will McCaskill, have done very, very good work, at least in this regard. I think their work is deeply flawed in terms of how to respond to existential risk, but in terms of mapping of existential risk, Bostrom and Ord and McCaskill are all apparently friends in Oxford, have done, I think, again, a very poor job about how to respond to existential risk on a number of levels, right? But an excellent job, right, in both coining the term and articulating the possibility of existential risk and bringing it, deep into consciousness. And so that's real. Existential risk is absolutely real. That's the death of our humanity. So what we do in this period of time could actually stop us from growing up. It could stop us from living all of those trillions of lives, right, in some fundamental sense. Or it could cause the death of our humanity. And the death of our humanity means, right, we don't actually go extinct, but we enter into a dystopian future. And I want to try and take a look at what that means for a second, because it's a very, very big deal. So right now, we're in a place, if I can coin a term, and in conversations last week, this term just emerged. We're at a moment of what I would call neuro-cultural plasticity. Plasticity is a term from the biological systems, right, of the last, 50, 75 years. I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, Metzinger. I'm not pronouncing his name right, I apologize to him, coined the term, right, a brilliant brain researcher whose material I've been reading for the last 2-3 years, and I still can't pronounce his name right, so if someone gets it right in the chat box, thank you, right? But, his work talks about plasticity, which means that we used to think that the brain, very, very early on in infancy or a little bit later, was essentially ossified, reified, frozen, and it doesn't change. The brain is a given. That had enormous implications. We now realize that's not true, that the brain is constantly rewiring itself. And for example, after you have an accident and you lose, for example, one part of the brain's hemisphere, then the other hemisphere will often rewire some of the functions of the lost part of the lost hemisphere. And that's true not only of the brain, but it's true of the entire body, right? The body is plastic, right? The systems of the body, including the brain, are plastic, and they have the ability at certain moments of crisis, right, to actually rewire themselves until they again get appropriately set in the mold or the pattern that they'll be in. Does everyone get that idea? That's called plasticity, okay? So not only is there plasticity in, if you will, the biological system, there's plasticity in the cultural system. Does everyone get that? There's plasticity in the cultural system. And McAllister, points out in a book that he wrote called What We Owe the Future, he points out that And he gives a very, very, good example in the 6th century. A particular dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, right, ends in China. And then there is a period of 400 years in which there's, what did they call it? I think I jotted it down here before. What was it called? It was called, right, the 100 schools of thought. I wrote it down right before we started. It was called the 100 schools of thought. And the 100 schools of thought was a 400-year period in which you have major schools competing with each other. You've got Confucianism, and you've got Taoism, and you've got what was later called, retrospectively legalism. You've got Moism. You've got these major 4 schools of thought battling for dominance until about 400 years later, when Confucianism wins the day. And then for 1,000 years, Confucianism is set, right, and dominates China. So he uses that as an example of these moments that are in between. So that's what we mean when we say we're at a time between worlds. Did you get that? Anyone who's been here many times, hopefully you're getting a whole new take on this. When we say we live at a time between worlds and a time between stories, what we mean is, right? What we mean is that there's a neuro-cultural plasticity in this moment. We're at a time between worlds. We're at a time between stories. So this neuro-cultural plasticity means that in this moment, it's not set. In this moment, it could go many different ways. Now, that's not generally the case. Generally, we're in a world, we're in a story, and you can't really even think outside of that story. You live inside of that story lives in you. You can't even see the story, right? You can't make the subject object. You can't see the story, you're just in the story. We're at this unique moment where we've stepped out of, at least at the leading edge. There's many of us who have stepped out of the old story. We realize that we're not just at a place where we need to, after COVID, get back to normal. We realize, as I've been trying to say for a couple of decades, and Barbara Marx Hubbard, our partner with whom I founded One Mountain, Many Paths, and who was the co-chair of our center, right, for the last years of her life, right? We actually realized in some, deep sense that this is a phase shift. We're at a phase shift in human history, unlike any that we've ever been in which everything's at stake, where all the old systems are breaking down, but the new system hasn't emerged. And in this space in between is a completely creative space. And in the space in between, the relationships between parts can be reconfigured. The space in between is this neuro-cultural plastic space in which what we do affects everything. Now, I want to get that. That wasn't true 200 years ago, and it may well not be true 200 years from now. It may not be true 100 years from now. It wasn't quite true 100 years ago. I want to get where this is. So this time between worlds, right, this time between stories is this space in between. And in this space in between, we're either going to do a reset by telling a new story of value rooted in first principles and first values, or something else is going to happen. Right? There's going to be a tragic dystopian value lock-in. And here's where McAllister and Ord and Bostrom go wrong. They're essentially beautiful people, highly moral, highly principled in their own lives. And yet, despite the fact that they come out of what I would call Derek Parfit's moral realism, they can't quite articulate a genuine theory of value. Right? Value for them is, in one sense or another, consequentialist. Value is based on its utilitarian effect in the world. And once you try and do consequentialist ethics, they always break down, as the critics of consequentialism have pointed out, and they can't ultimately motivate you, because we're motivated by an intrinsic sense of responding to value that's real. You can't deconstruct value and say that value is a mere fiction. This is the way kind of the circle of postmodernity talks about value. Value is a mere fiction. Value is a figment of our imagination, right? Value is a story. Value is pragmatically consequentialist. No, value is real. Value is an intrinsic structure of cosmos. And so we need to actually create a world not in which we just keep open competing values, which is what McCaskill suggests. No, we actually have to download into reality, right, a vision of a set of first principles and first values that are evolving. So one of those first principles and first values is that those values themselves evolve. Those first principles and first values form a universal grammar of value. And that universal grammar of value is a context for our diversity. So it's a context for many plural, right, various subtle and nuanced understandings and applications of value. But at the center, there has to be, right, a shared sense of first principles and first values, right, of evolving first principles and first values that are rooted in a story of value. So we need to know that uniqueness is a value and that truth is a value and that peace is a value. But those are real values. They're not pragmatic values. They're not just we made them up because it seems to be good, right, for our ability to have a good meal today. No. We're actually feeling and knowing that value lives in us, that justice is a real value, that kindness is a real value, that eros is a real value, that sensuality is a real value. Sensuality means it's worth being sensual with someone. That's a value. Right? The exchange of pleasure is a value. And that's that there's a set of first principles and first values that actually animate cosmos and that move all the way up the evolutionary chain and very far down the evolutionary chain. That in matter, life, and mind, right, there are evolving expressions of the same field of value. And one of the values is mystery. It's not all worked out. And one of the values is, right, part of mystery is uncertainty. But that these are real and that what we do matters ultimately. And in that our lives are part of the field of value and that our lives are not over when they're over. That we participate in the field of value and that value is eternal, not in the sense of unchanging, but in the sense of that which is beneath space and time. We participate in the field of value, which is beneath space and time. And we need in this moment of plasticity, right, to actually download those values because the alternative is a value lock-in. And that's what McAllister talks about accurately. Right? And a value lock-in means that at this time between worlds and time between stories, at this moment of what I'm calling neuro-cultural plasticity, if we don't actually download first principles and first values, which are valid, which integrate the best of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern validated insights into a new evolving perennialism. Not a perennialism, not a perennial philosophy that's unchanging, but an evolving perennialism. These are all new terms, and I know that's a lot for someone that's new, and we're going to unpack over this year each one of these terms. But if we don't do that, the alternative is a tragic dystopian value lock-in. And I want to explain for a moment kind of what that means. But I want to really, with your permission, and this is a big deal. I want to try and articulate for you what that means. And this is the key of everything today. This is the key of today. People always, before they emerge in their fullest and most noble selves, right? People go through, and both individual human beings, often people never get past going through what I'm about to describe before they die. Some people do transform. But not just people, but humanity. It goes through these same stages. These are stages in which there's a seeking of dominance. We want to dominate. We want our vision of the world to dominate. Alexander the Great wanted Hellenism to last forever. Hitler wanted there to be a 1,000-year Reich. Chinese, right, emperors who reigned only 15 years, spend the 15 years planning for their dynasty to last forever, which of course it never did. But there's a sense that we want our vision of the world to last forever. Now that's a big deal because we're in a world today in which there's an enormous battle between open societies and closed societies. And the way McAllister tells the story, although he clearly comes from the open society side of the world, but he refuses in his chapter chapter 4 on value, to actually say that one set of values is actually better than any other set, because he has no ultimate basis to say that other than consequentialism, which doesn't give you a ground and intrinsic value. And over the long term of history, we're actually not sure. China's making a case that ultimately over, generations and generations, their system's going to work better. So McAllister can't actually create a hierarchy of values. Nothing can ever be better ultimately, right, than anything else. Although there's lip service paid, right, to that kind of claim. And beautiful lip service. And read Derek Parfit, right, his teacher. He's stunning. I have all of his books upstairs, and I've been reading through them the last 6, 7, 8 weeks. They're gorgeous. But ultimately, we need to be grounded in the Tao. The Tao is a field of value. And once we step out of the Tao, right, we step into the abolition of man, as C.S. Lewis said it. And the Tao is the field of value. Once we step out of the field of value, even if we have a couple of generations of benevolent articulators of culture, like Parfit, like Bostrom, right, like, the young McCaskill and Toby, and blessings to you guys, right? But ultimately, that's not going to hold. Right? Once you step out of the Tao, once you step out of the field of value, you're ultimately in the realm of nihilism. And in the realm of nihilism, when you're in the realm of nihilism, when you're in the realm of you're not standing for actual value, then the nihilism emerges. And in response to nihilism, you have various forms of closed society. That's what China is. That's what Russia is trying to be. It's what Hungary, right, is becoming. It's what the Philippines is becoming. It's where Brazil is going. It's where Sweden, strangely, is going. It's where Italy, right, is going. It's where France has very strong movements in that direction. It's where the United States has strong movements in that direction. Right? Movements towards some version of closed society. Now let's take closed society, for example, from the perspective of China. So closed society from the perspective of China, let's track this for a second. This is a big, big deal. So the closed society responds to this breakdown of value, responds to the sense that the West is not standing for value, and says, no, we're going to superimpose values from above, and those values are going to be totalitarian. And those values are going to create concentration camps around China. And those values are going to create a total surveillance system without first values and first principles, in which there's no value to the individual. And there's no value to unique human personhood. And there is no sense of unique self. And there is no sense of the intrinsic value of goodness, truth, and beauty. And there is no sense of human personhood. And there is no ultimate sense of universal human rights, let alone, right, governance through more advanced forms than top-down, totalitarian, brutal, murderous dictatorship. And the Chinese Communist Party today, right, is essentially a mafia. It's a brutal mafia which engages in the most brutal tactics, right, of murder and mayhem. Let me just say that clearly. And anyone who's studied and read, you're not just reading the news, who's actually read seriously about what the Chinese Communist Party is, right? It is a degraded expression, right, of what humanity needs to be. So let's say, watch this for a second. Let's say we don't manage to articulate a universal grammar of value. Let's say we just go about our lives and we do our little projects and our little new age engagements and we do our transformations. We actually ignore the day. Right? We ignore the fact that we're at this moment of neuro-cultural plasticity. And we don't actually download, right, a compelling vision, a vision that's compelling to the people of China, a vision that's compelling to Russia, that actually begins to emerge as a universal grammar of value. So what's going to happen is, now stay with me for a second, what's going to happen is that the first group that achieves technological supremacy, for example, AGI, artificial general intelligence. So if a country achieves AGI, artificial general intelligence, which according to multiple estimates, there's a significant possibility in the next 20 to 50 years, a significant possibility that that could happen. And let's say that country is China. I want you to get this. Let's say that country is China. So if that country is China, so what China will seek to do is to lock in its values. Now, I want to explain what that means. If you actually achieve AGI, artificial general intelligence, which means not local artificial general intelligence, means not local artificial intelligence, which can do one particular action exponentially better than humans, but you actually can do everything. Right now you have an artificial intelligence that can do one thing. It's really good at chess and at playing Go, but it's not good at, ordering groceries. So you have very, very localized, exponentially developed local artificial intelligences, not general. But if you actually get to an artificial general intelligence, right, and that general intelligence is owned by a closed society, a totalitarian state, so that artificial general intelligence will, watch carefully, our friends, within 6 months to a year, 2 years, right, the rate of productivity and economic explosion and military power explosion generated by the artificial intelligence that will be achievable by that country will make them the dominant force in the world in a very, 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 very narrow window of time. In other words, the country that achieves that will dominate the globe. And when I say dominate the globe, it's not an old world. It means they dominate all of the planetary stack. All of the computational infrastructure, the planetary stack of reality, is completely dominated, right, by that country. Wow. And that country then goes to download their value structure into the whole world. And in order to get food, right, to get a job, right, to participate in any way in society, right, you actually need to be part of that, what China today calls social credit system, but you've got to be part of that world infrastructure. If you're not part of the world infrastructure, essentially you die. So within a generation or two, that dystopian downgraded value structure becomes the value structure of humanity. Wow. That's what I mean by the death of our humanity. So there's two possibilities. There's the death of humanity, extinction. Then there's this other dystopian possibility, which is a second form of existential risk, which I've been talking about for the last couple of years. Together we've been talking about it. And in our Unique Self Symphony, it's not the death of humanity, it's the death of our humanity. And what we've been saying week after week, but sometimes it's easy to lose what that means. We're at a time between worlds, we're at a time between stories. Meaning we're at this moment of maximal neurocultural plasticity, when actually what we do can affect the future. That's a very rare place to be in history. There's actually no generation that's ever been in all of history at this place where what we do, imagine we've lived for 4 trillion years, 100 billion lives. But we're just at the first 0.5%. That's what we said earlier. If humanity lives like most mammalian species 1 million years, we're at the first 0.5% of all of our future lives. And what we do could actually cause us to suicide. We could have no future lives, meaning we will have essentially left in non-existence, essentially murdered trillions and trillions and trillions of gorgeous, irreducibly unique expressions of love, intelligence, and love, beauty, boys and girls and babies and old men and old women and wise ones, and right, all of it, right? Or if we don't actually engage in this great project, this overwhelming moral imperative of this time, and articulate a new story of value, right? First principles and first values, evolving first principles and first values, embedded in a story of value. If we don't articulate that vision and actually have the audacity to say, we want to download this, and we want to actually engage the world, and we want to talk to China and talk to Russia and talk to every closed society and invite them into this possibility so that they see that we actually are standing for value. We're not in a nihilism. We're not in what Putin thinks is a kind of postmodern, weak and broken West. We're actually standing for value. We're standing strong for that value, right? And we're aligned with value in a deep way, and it's evolving value. And it's a story of value that we're willing to place everything on the line for, right? And it's a coherent system of value. Up till now, we have not presented a coherent system of value in the world. We haven't, right? Putin, Xi, right? Orban, right? They've looked at the West as a kind of postmodern breakdown, right? No longer standing for value in any genuine sense. And there was a moment where the West came together around Ukraine, which was critically important. And we talked about that here. And Alana has done a beautiful job of bringing those talks together, and we're going to share them, shortly with the world. And that's broken down in many ways. We have to come together and stand for value, but we can't do that because we actually don't have a theory of value. We don't have a vision of first values and first principles, right? We're stuck in all the postmodern critiques of value, which are valid, but we haven't moved beyond them. So what we're here to do is to tell a new story. Because to tell a new story of value, rooted in first principles and first values, at this time of neurocultural plasticity, is the single most compelling moral act with most consequences, with most effect, right? Because what we do at this moment of plasticity, what we do at this time between worlds and time between stories will affect everything. So what we need to do is we need to give new answers, but not declarations, not made up answers, the deepest, most beautiful, most gorgeous, most grounded, most validated answers we can to the great questions of, right? Who am I? Who are we? Where are we? What kind of world do we live in? What's there to do? What's our deepest heart's desire? Right? What does it mean to be a man and a woman? What does it mean to be in a relationship? What does it mean to create an economy? What does it mean to create politics? All of that depends on these basic questions: who and where and what.